Okay, welcome to our first lesson with Scratch. Once you create an account, you'll be greeted with this landing page. We're going to go through a couple of things, just getting used to the interface. To start, click on Create, and it's going to take you to the interface where you will be greeted with a screen, which has a couple of locations we're going to talk about. First of all, on the left here, we have a number of little circular icons, okay? And you can see that these are related to these what are called code blocks, okay? So we've got this list here, which goes all the way down to my blocks, and you can scroll through those to see what's there. We've got this area here, which is called the script window, okay? And that's where we'll be adding our pieces of code blocks, okay, to make our code. And then we've got a stage where our character exists in Scratch, and usually any animated coded program, we would call this a sprite. Okay, so we've got our sprite here right now is this cat. And we've also got a properties inspector, right, which is here and tells us some information about our sprite. And we've got a number of other sort of little icons around the screen, okay, zooms, and we've got things like we can add sprites or add backdrops to our screen. We've got some tabs here, costumes and sounds, which we'll go through in a moment. Okay, so that's the general interface. If you're working on a project, you can click here to title the project, whatever you want to title it. If you're working on a demo, for example, which is what we're working on, I just hit that, click Save Now, it'll save the project. To view your available projects, things you've worked on throughout the course, you click on this folder, it will take you into the My Stuff area, where you can see a list of all of your work. And then by clicking See Inside, it'll take you back into this interface. Okay, again, out to your folder, See Inside to go into the inner workings of your project. While we're in this view, this is the editor view. I can also click here and view this in the play view or the preview. If I'm doing a game or an animation or anything, this is the view that the user would have, right? And so any interaction that I have would have to happen here, except when I'm working on the project itself, I can see the inner workings of that project in my script window. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what we have here. We have this sprite, this cat here. And if I want to add any other sprites, I just click on the add sprite. I can scroll down and pick another sprite. I'll grab a ghost. And now we have two sprites in our stage and two sprites available in our properties tab. You can see also when I click on either of these, it puts a little blue line or icon around the sprite that's been selected, indicating that that is the active sprite. And you'll also see a little grayed out version of whichever is active here, because the code or code blocks that are added here are now relevant to this sprite. If I go over to the ghost, you'll see that it has no active code on it until I drag some there, and you can see that these are separate pieces of code. I'm going to drag these away back out to the inspector here, and you'll see that they disappear. Okay, if I want to get rid of an icon or a sprite, I can just click on the sprite and then here click on delete, and it'll get rid of that sprite. Okay, let's take a look at this properties inspector. So here we've got the name of the sprite. We've got an X and a Y coordinate. So if I click in here and make this 0 and hit enter, it'll set it to a Y coordinate of 0 on a Cartesian plane. And if I click on the Y axis and I add a 0 here, it'll set that up. And you can see that by clicking and picking this up, I can change the position and it's affecting that X and that Y coordinate. We also have visibility on or off. We have size, which is a percentage. So this is the full size of this character. I can drop it to 50. I can turn it to 200 and change the size of my sprite. Put that guy back to 100%. We also have direction, which is a little more confusing. It's not confusing once you understand what it's doing. It's just not doing maybe what you would expect. So this is straight up and down, which you might not expect to be 90 degrees, but this is directionality. So what we're seeing here is which way would this thing move if it were told to move a couple steps ahead, and we'll look at that in a moment. So the other thing to note is that if this is 0 and this is 90 and this is 180, when you cross over the 180 line, it switches to a negative. Okay, and then you're back down to -90 and -1, whatever. Okay, so just have a note of how that works. 90. Oops, try that again. 90. All right, so that's directionality. And so as you're learning these tools, you'll see that you have some control over these properties here. Okay, and you can either drag and drop or place your objects, or with code, we're going to be specifying exactly where things are moved to. Next, we'll take a quick look at costumes. So up here, when I click on this tab, you'll see there are currently 1, 2, 3, 4 states that this ghost can be in. There are 4 what are called costumes. And if currently the first one, which is ghost A, is the one that has been selected in this list, well, that's what you see in your sprite window. If I click here on B, it updates this here, and you'll see it's now changed to this, or C, or D, or whatever the costume you select is. You'll also notice if you've done any maybe Illustrator or some drawing programs, you'll recognize some tools here. Okay, we often will just use characters the way they are. We won't be doing too much editing, but know that you can experiment with this and change things. So right now this is grouped. I could ungroup it if I wanted to. Then I could select one element and I could say change the color of it if I were so inclined. I'm not, so I'm just going to undo that and put it back to being a grouped item. But know that you do have some control over there. Okay, and you can experiment with that if you'd like to. Okay, so going back out to my code. So notice that if I change this to that second costume and go back out to my code, now I'm working with this sprite in that state. That's the default state because I've changed it. So I'm going to put that back to where it was and then return to my code window. We won't use sound in this tutorial. We'll come back to that in a subsequent lesson. Okay, so let's look at how we can use some of these code blocks here to affect what's happening in our little movie. Okay, so the first one, we'll look at this set here. Motion, looks, events are the ones we'll sort of cover in this lesson, just getting a sense of them. Some of it's going to be experimentation on your part to see what things do, and they're pretty straightforward. You'll learn by doing often, just by experimenting. So I encourage you to do that as much as possible. Try things and see what happens, and go to Google and look up Scratch code blocks, and there are plenty of ways to learn, but I find just doing things is the easiest just because these things are named in quite an intuitive way. So if we take a look, for example, if I want to move something, well, if I look in this, it's called motion. If I look here, we've got a couple of examples. We've got move 10 steps. I've got another one here that says that change X by 10 steps or 10. And these sound like they're kind of doing a similar thing, and they are. If I click on this, you'll see that it moves 10 steps every time I do it. And the same thing with this change X by 10, right? It just moves it. And if I change that to -10 and then click it, it moves it in the opposite direction. And the same thing happens with this. Okay, same idea. The difference is what I mentioned earlier in terms of that directionality. So if I rotate this, I'm going to point them up in this direction here. And now if I change my X by -10, it's going to move my X from whatever it is right now, -10. It's going to change it by 10, so it makes it -20. And you can see all that's happening is it's moving to the left on my screen. Whereas if I change the, if I use this code block, move 10 steps, it's going to use directionality to define which way it's going rather than X and Y. So now what's happening, based on the position, if you remember, this direction was 90. And if I'm moving 10 negative steps or 10 positive steps, it's moving forward according to this position. And if I change it this way, it's moving 10 steps according to this position. Okay, so that's something to note, just that these two blocks work a little bit differently, but they're not all that confusing. Change Y does exactly what you expect it to do. And if I change it to a larger number, the increment will be bigger. Okay. Let's notice that these shapes click together, right? I can add or subtract code blocks to each other. And when I do this, it moves, it runs this one step, and you can see there's a little yellow line around the code block as it does it. If I connect this, you'll see the yellow block goes around everything, and it's going to do all of the things in this block. Now, some of these are contradictory. I've selected them very carefully. So I'll put this back. I'm going to put this guy back to 90, set this guy back to 0 and 0. And then let's grab a rotate, and I'm going to make that 45 degrees. Okay, and I'm going to add a change X and change Y. Okay, and now every time it turned, it'll turn 45 degrees. And at the same time, it directionally moves its, oh, sorry, it, according to the Cartesian plane X and Y, it moves 10 steps up and 10 steps right. And if I switch that, it'll do the exact opposite. So it's moving diagonally. Okay, if I take this off of here and I just do this, it'll just do the diagonal piece. So it depends on what you've got connected. Now we're doing this by clicking here, but I mentioned earlier that when you're in this interface, I don't have those code blocks. So in this case, I can't control it. So I need to use something called events. So let's take a look at events here and see what's happening. There are 3 events we're going to look at in specific. We're going to look at when the green flag is clicked, when a key is pressed, and when this sprite is clicked. We'll learn more of these afterwards, but for now, just to get a sense of what these things do, I'm going to pull these 3 events out, and we'll use one at a time. So let's get rid of that. Actually, we'll keep this guy. All right, so when the green flag is clicked, let's set this guy back to 0, 0, 90. Okay, when I click this green flag, it does my 45-degree rotation. Okay, and that also occurs here because in this interface, I have the green flag. Okay, I can also, as you can now guess, when the space bar is, or the space key is pressed, okay, or whichever key you decide, right key, etc., etc., etc. There's the whole alphabet there and numbers, and there's also an any key. Okay, take that off of here. Finally, we have when this sprite is clicked, and this, of course, like the other one, is available here because I can now interact with the sprite. Okay, same thing with if I took this back and put the right arrow. Okay, I'll change that back to space, and then we'll test it here. And when I hit the space bar, that works exactly the way you expect it to. Okay, so that's sort of interacting with the sprite by using some of this code. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. This is a logic course. It's not a coding course. We're not learning any syntax. We're just learning how to think in the way that a computer can understand with the instructions that have been given. Okay, so that's sort of what we're looking at here. Some things I've sort of mentioned experimenting, and I suggest that you do that. I suggest you try and like pull some of these things out and see what happens. What happens when I click on a random position? Okay, it goes to a random position. What does this glide over 1 second to a random position? Oh, that's what it does. So this process of learning and experimenting is probably the best way to figure out what's happening, and paying attention to what does happen and maybe differences between code blocks is a great way to pick up skills. Okay, one of the last sort of things I'll mention is that as much as these fit together a certain way, you'll notice that not everything does. Of course, I can't add this at the bottom of, you'll see it doesn't click there. It only fits a certain way. And then some, which we're not going to talk about today in particular, but I'll just show you, when I have this stop, which would stop all scripts that are running, this obviously fits here, and then I can't add anything to the bottom because it doesn't allow me, it doesn't have a, that sort of connecting kind of bump there. But if I change this to other scripts and sprite, and what you'll notice is some of these code blocks, some of them have an input window, some of them have a shape that will fit other operators or other code blocks. In this case, there's a drop down, and I can pick, say, other scripts in the sprite, and notice now that shape has changed, allowing me to connect these. So depending on what you're doing, you know, these things sometimes change and give you new options and new kind of functionality. Okay, so paying attention to that and sort of what happens as you experiment. Okay, let's take a look at what we can do. So I'm going to connect all this stuff and get rid of it, and we'll just look at one more thing. And the last thing we'll look at is, I'm going to put this guy back again to 90. Okay, and 0 here, and 0 here. And we'll just look at changing costumes with one of these tools. So we'll go to motion, events, I should say. And we'll say when the sprite is clicked, we're going to, our costume names were Ghost A, B, C, and D. Okay, so we're just going to go to looks, which is the way your sprite looks. And I can either go next backdrop. So when I click it, it's going to go to the next, that didn't work. Oh, not backdrop, sorry. Next costume. Okay, and when I click it, it's going to go through the available costumes. So that's A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Or alternatively, I can specify which one I want it to go to. So if I click on it, I can say go to, B. There, that worked. Or I can have different events controlling different things. So if instead of using this, I wanted my event to be when a specific key, so let's say B, okay, is going to go to Ghost B, and I can duplicate this now and say A is going to go to Ghost A, and C is going to go to Ghost C. You get the idea here. I won't do them all because I think you can guess what D will do. And now when I hit A on my keyboard, it goes to A and B and C. So these are just some of the controls you can use. And now we'll learn and we'll experiment with these, and you'll add more as you learn and as you go through the lessons. But for now, this is an introduction to the interface, just enough so that you can kind of get a sense of what's here, kind of get a sense of what you can do, and then from here, move on to the next tutorial where you'll be given kind of a task to figure out kind of using your brain and using what we've kind of covered in this lesson. All right, good luck. And I hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot an email and I'll try and get back as soon as possible. Thanks. Have a great day.